we are on the coast in Saltburn, in Cleveland, and I'm here with Steve Turner. Apologies, Steve. Your surname just temporarily went from my head. Steve Turner, who is the Cleveland Police and Crime Commissioner. The first results that was announced on PCC election day. We'll come back to that a little bit later on. And I'd also, on my right-hand side, Lisa Oldroyd, who is the Chief Executive for the OPCC in Cleveland, and also was temporarily the unelected Police and Crime Commissioner. Now, Lisa has told me that the focus needs to be here on Steve, but we are going to come to Lisa from time to time for the occasional input. And look, after an absolutely torrential rain afternoon yesterday, can I just do a sweep of the panorama? And Steve, just take us through, this is the Cleveland coastline. Just beyond is the North Yorkshire Moors, which people know about.
So that's Huntcliffe, you see in the background there, and beyond that you get to Whitby and then Scarborough, and then as you come right round,
just pan round and look at this glorious coastline.
Ships you see on the edge are all waiting to go into Teesport, where our new Freeport's going to be.
Yep.
You've got the wind farm just off the coast of Redcar there, and right in the very distance on the other side of the mouth of the Tees is Hatton.
Unfortunately, I can't zoom in on this camera, at least not easily. And then we have the behind us, or at the side of us, this coastline where the actual town itself is up from the coast. So there's a cable car type thing, which is
a vernacular,
and it involves water power as well, I'm told.
It's the only water powered one in the country, I believe.
Well, there we are. So Cleveland not only has the transporter bridge, which I took a point of looking at late yesterday afternoon, which is amazing, and I do hope it gets back in service quite soon, but also this unique cable car.
Saltburn's a traditional Victorian seaside town.
I'm looking forward to exploring it a little bit more a little later on. So you were elected just, I think, 6 weeks ago now, and when I was monitoring the results coming through, I'll be honest with you, you could have knocked me over with a feather.
Yeah. When
the Cleveland result came through.
I think that's nationally that's fair. On paper, you look at Cleveland. Historically, it had been a traditional one-party area, quite comfortably as such, but there was a lot of local circumstances. The history of the force, or the recent history of the force, is well documented. We've got an awful lot of challenges from a policing perspective. That obviously brought great focus on the leadership of that force from the PCC's perspective. We had the replacement, or the Labour candidate, decided to, after nearly a year of being the candidate for PCC, he decided he'd rather stand as an MP in the Hartlepool by-election, which was happening on the same day. And then we had a Metro Mayor election as well for Ben Houchin, the Tees Valley Mayor, and that was all happening on the same day. So locally, it probably wasn't as big a shock as it was nationally.
And the reason it was a shock for me, and I pride myself on knowing a little bit and a bit more about PCCs and policing governance here in the UK, was that there had been a Labour Cleveland Police and Crime Commissioner since 2012, and these elections took place this year in 2021. It had been a safe Labour seat, and although there had been parliamentary elections, and indeed the mayoral election, where the Conservative candidate was elected a few years ago now, that suggested that the political complexion was changing, it still was a surprise, and it was the first results that suggested in those PCC elections that there was quite a sea change, a blue wave, I've heard it referred to, where now there's a clear majority, very clear majority of Conservative PCCs in the country.
Yeah.
Just with, relatively speaking, a handful of tending to be more urban seats and mayoralties that are conservatively run. Labour run. You referred also to the the challenging, if I can use that word, backstory to Cleveland that I think is most accurately summarised by HMIC, Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary, giving Cleveland back in 2018 uniquely 4 inadequate assessments. It's unheard of. That is the only time that HMIC has given, in the 4 key categories, any force 4 inadequates.
Yeah.
And that was the point just before that, when your current Chief Constable came on board. There having been, I think, 5 Chief Constables in just about as many years. You saw something of that prior to your election.
I did. I used to work for 2 local MPs, so we'd seen, as we walked to the soft side.
Should we go back on this? This is a local hazard. So, unlike some of the other hazards that we've had, or I've had on this policing friendship tour, this is actually quite a pleasant hazard.
This is a pleasant hazard.
Yes, I'm not objecting to this.
No, so we had, I think, if you include the temporary Chief Constables, we've had 6 in 8 years, which in itself is never going to produce good results. I, on the other side of the political divide, had been openly quite challenging around the fact that we couldn't seem to get it right, and we'd made some pretty poor decisions, if I'm honest, in my opinion, and in others. So coming into that, and coming into wanting to stand as the PCC, I did an awful lot of work around what the force really needed, what senior people within the force actually felt it had to have, and the size of the challenge. And I think one of the stories I tell quite often was, at the time, before I even stood as a candidate, I was told quite clearly that when our officers went away to courses or to conferences, and they'd be going on a table and having an introduction, and they'd say, "Oh, I'm Bob, I'm from Avon, I'm so-and-so, I'm from the Met," and it'd get to Cleveland and it's like, "Hi, I'm Stephen, I'm from Cleveland, and I'm sorry." There was no pride in our force, and that's a really sad state of affairs. So from that day, I put everything into my election campaign, and since I've been elected, it's about putting the pride back into Cleveland Police for me. And that's a strap line, and some people say, "Oh, well, it's a soundbite," but it's not a soundbite. It actually means something here in Cleveland.
So you've been in. Your election was 6 weeks ago, so still very early days, so in your election address, the headline was "More Police, Safer Streets." How are you going to achieve that?
The government's uplift programme has been a massive help to us. But what we've done here in Cleveland...
So this is additional 20,000 officers, and funding for that, nationally?
National funding. Cleveland's part of that is about 240 officers. We've taken a decision at force level to front load all that. So it's a 4-year uplift programme. We will achieve that in just over 2. So all those extra officers. Now there's some short-term pain in that. A lot of inexperienced officers in response roles and things like that. But that will give us long-term benefits. So that side of it working. We're also in Cleveland looking at how we distribute those officers. So there's a greater focus coming back into our neighbourhood policing, which before the current Chief Constable, before myself, was inexplicably done away with. And we moved away from neighbourhood policing. Again, that was one of the decisions where rank and file officers would question and say, "Well, why did we do that?" And I'm the same, why did we do that? But we did, and we're coming away from that now. So that will give more officers on the streets, which is where the public want to see them, in neighbourhoods. And in terms of the safer streets, there is so much more we can do in terms of violent crime, knife crime. We've had the Home Secretary up in the last 2 weeks, had the Policing Minister up in the last 2 weeks, pitching to them what we want to build in a violence reduction unit, how we need government support for that to get that off the ground, and what that looks like, because that's not just all about kicking doors in, it's about the diversionary stuff that goes behind it and the long-term effects on young people, and how we take them out of that cycle that just sees them spiral into into drugs and gangs and county lines and things like that.
When there's traditionally been, when police recruitment schemes have opened in different forces, there has rarely, in my experience, been any difficulty in getting numbers coming forward. But there have sometimes, depending on the force area, been challenges in getting a diverse group of candidates. I was talking about this with Shay Donald, the Vice Chair of the Police Federation of England and Wales, just before their conference, and getting a diversity of candidates, whether it's ethnicity or background, academic. Unless you wish us to, I don't plan to sort of explore the academic side, because that's a whole half-hour discussion in itself.
Yes.
But just in terms of getting the recruits from a diverse a talent pool, is that something you're satisfied with?
I think the challenge we have here in Cleveland is when we talk about a diverse mix, or in essence, male and female is easy. I'm quite comfortable with where we're at in terms of female officers coming through. I think the challenge comes when you start looking at ethnicity, and from that perspective, what we have here in Cleveland is we don't have a large BAME community. In terms of percentage, we're well below the national.
Black Asian minority ethnic.
Minorities, yeah. So we're well below the national average for that. But then the other side in Cleveland is it's concentrated in pockets. So we've got 4 boroughs, and 2 of those boroughs, in Hartlepool and in Redcar and Cleveland, that percentage is lower still. So there's a higher concentration in our 2 central boroughs in Middlesbrough and Stockton, and less on the outskirts in Hartlepool and Redcar. So that presents challenges because we're fishing in a smaller pond. So on paper, we might not quite hit the percentages, but then if you actually look at where we're recruiting from the areas where we have a higher percentage, we're probably much closer to where we need to be on that.
And I imagine one of the things that police and crime commissioners need by statute to do is to produce a police and crime plan, particularly for the newly elected PCCs, of which that is the majority of police and crime commissioners. Their plan will be a work in progress for those previously. So those re-elected, effectively it may simply be refreshing their existing. But for the newly elected, particularly where there's been a change of political allegiance, that could be a major change. Now, I'm just going to warn you, Lisa, I'm going to come to you in a moment or two. You're not on camera just at the moment, but you will be very shortly. Your police and crime plan won't. I haven't seen it. I don't think you've turned it round in 6 weeks.
Funny enough, I presented the first draft of it to the police and crime panel on Tuesday night.
Okay, so very quick.
Well, we've got till March to implement it.
Yes,
and that's too long for me. I can't wait till March. So.
You've only got 3 years tenure as opposed to 4, which would normally be the case.
So what we've done is we've presented it, the first draft, within 6 weeks. Consultation, formal public consultation on that starts on Monday. And we'll aim to have that in place by September. And
we're recording this at the very early part of July.
Yes.
Yeah. So it is with it being presented to the police and crime panel. It will be in public domain. I can't imagine that those were proceedings held out of public. So it is in public, the way that you're looking to develop. Lisa, I'm going to spin the camera around just here. As Chief Executive of the OPCC, Office for the Police and Crime Commissioner, and just sort of coming off your responsibilities as an unelected PCC, which we could explore that another time, but perhaps not this time. Turning that police and crime plan around for your newly elected PCC, I'm imagining that was quite a challenge.
It is. So it was about us understanding the PCC's manifesto commitments and how we translate that into a public-facing plan that's simplistic, meaningful, and most important will be that it's measurable. That's key in terms of accountability and transparency, in terms of we have performance measures to actually measure our distance travelled and also the impact that we will make in terms of the successful delivery of that plan as well.
And so presumably whilst the PCC elections were going on, possibly beforehand, you and your team would have been doing some preparatory work.
And in terms
Steve
of
was the rank outsider, but you still, you forgive me, Steve.
That's all right.
But it was in terms of our team doing that environmental scanning. In terms of, obviously, we're politically neutral in terms of a team, but it's about being politically aware, understanding what those candidates' manifesto commitments were, and forward planning, like I said, in terms of translating those into a plan for the arrival of the new PCC.
There's quite a set of significant statutory responsibilities that any office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, or indeed Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner, actually has. They won't be widely understood. They're not widely understood actually within England and Wales, let alone internationally. But there's a whole, further conversation to be had on that. But I'm going to spin the camera around this way to, first of all, the beach huts. Here on Saltburn, just double check Saltburn, yeah, and then this pier, which sadly I don't know whether it ever had a set of attractions at the end of it, but that certainly looks a feature I'll be exploring later on. If we might even find that we get there as part of this. So, Steve, the camera now back on you. I want to turn now to the HMIC, Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary, and we touched on this right at the start, but so they had a pretty dire assessment of Cleveland. Richard Lewis, your current Chief Constable, came in just before that damning HMIC report was published. You've mentioned the morale as evidenced by the apology that officers would give in national events that they are from the Cleveland representative. Broadly to start with, and then we'll come on to the specific of the most recent HMIC announcement. Picking up now 6 weeks in as PCC, what do you think your key, dare I say, levers would need to be with the force and with the Chief Constable?
I think what I've seen and what's in place, the executive team which it's built, the structure he's put in place amongst senior officers now, the direction in which the force is heading, on paper looks like he's going to do the right things. So my role isn't to change that, because that's operational policing, right? And they've got to get that right. My role is to make sure that they do deliver that, and that comes in scrutiny. So the big lever I can pull is how we do scrutiny, because it's all right having a great plan on paper and people telling you it's happening, but if then I walk into a police station that morning and say, don't know what you're on about, Gov, right? That's not working. And those are the types of things I need to check up on. So my scrutiny will focus entirely on what are we doing towards that plan, how are we measuring the improvements, and are those improvements actually happening where they need to happen? And that type of questioning is not just about me asking the exec team what's happening, it's about me and my team when we're out and about, talking to officers, talking to police staff and saying, have you seen this? Is it working? Could it be better? Right? Are you happy with the way, in the direction of travel? And that's a fundamental change in the way we do scrutiny in Cleveland, because that hasn't happened before.
So there are different types of relationship that there have been since 2012, 3 terms now, the 3rd term we're in of PCCs. Differences in the style of relationship between the Police and Crime Commissioner and their Chief Constable, which if you sort of look at it as a spectrum of at the midpoint, critical friend, and at the extremes of the spectrum, best buddy and severe critic. Where would you sit, and how do you see that relationship?
You've got to sit in the middle. Richard's a great guy, right? And I am sure we've got lots in common. We're both fanatical about rugby, quite big into sports.
League or union? Let's just check.
Union.
Okay.
Union. He's a proud Welshman. So we've had some banter.
Well, I've seen some of the communications in Welsh, which you know.
So we've had some banter, but now we're together in the Lions tour, and we'll see that go forward. So we do have a lot in common, and in a different life, I'm sure we would be friends, and we go out for a drink and this, that, and the other. We don't live there. That's not what we're about. I've got a job to do, he's got a job to do, so there has to be that distance element between the two of us. And it's not just about Richard, it's about his team and what they're doing. So sometimes I'll be challenging the Chief Constable, but I'll actually be challenging him about what his team are doing and things. So and he's experienced enough to know that, and he's built that team.
Yep.
He's built the foundations to build on, and if God forbid he got knocked over by a bus tomorrow,
Let's hope not. It's none of us want to.
none of us want that.
But
if he did, he's built some great foundations.
Yeah.
Right, and we would just carry on in that vein, because the plan he's built is a good one.
Okay, and then down to the specific. So in the last few days, HMIC has published a follow-up to a particular area of criticism. So this particular area relating to workforce communication, fair treatment, and the report that HMIC published, in very broad terms, it signed off the force on, I think, 6 of 8 areas,
Yep.
but not, it said work in progress still in 2 areas. The 2 areas being on support for potential future leaders,
Yeah.
and on involving the workforce in decision making.
Yeah, and that's just in one pillar, don't forget.
It is in one
Yeah.
pillar, yes. So, well, perhaps just explain so it's one of a number.
It's one of a number, so we are inadequate in all areas, and each of those pillars, if you like, has a series of challenges underneath them. So what we've done,
We'll pause here because we're heading towards. I'll pan the camera in a moment or two. Carry on.
Each of those pillars has a series of challenges underneath them, and what HMIC do is they come in and they inspect them individually. So that particular area we've made fantastic inroads into. It's still not signed off, so there's still more work to do. The reality of going into, I think, somewhere like Northampton, I think, was the last force to have 2 or 3 pillars of inadequate, and we've got 6, and it took them 3 years to come out of that. For us, it's a 3-4 year gig to even get to back on an even keel, if you like. So this is a very small step in a long journey, a bit like your own.
Well, yes. So what is it? 500 miles in at the moment, and probably about 1,500 in the UK.
Yeah.
Yet to do. But then, so on the specifics of support for potential future leaders, involving the workforce in decision making, is that something then that currently rests with the force to respond on?
It all rests within the force, and what I do, and it's part of my scrutiny programme, and leadership is something myself and Richard talked about, because he and his leadership team aren't going to be here forever, and we're building a force for this generation and for the next generation. We never want to be in this situation again. So building that future leadership capability, seeing what we come in, he's come in, all of his senior team have come in from outside of Cleveland. Right? We both want to see a situation where officers within Cleveland are coming up to the ranks and are strong, capable leaders in their own area, because when you've got that passion for the area you live in and you're brought up in, it shows, and that's really what I want to see coming through. But that is a multi-year gig, without shadow of a doubt, to get something like that in place.
Well, we've walked a bit of a stretch along the beach. We've come to the pier. I think shortly we'll head up. The lift up to the town is not currently working, but I'm sure that there's an ice cream there that if I can't tempt the 2 of you, then certainly I will be indulging in. One of the things that I ask, the last thing I ask those that have been walking with me on this policing friendship tour is about a charity that's dear to your heart. So your charity.
I would and have always supported, well, not always, I've supported Prostate Cancer UK. I used to play rugby, and I broke my neck some years back.
Goodness, I didn't know that. Well,
yeah, no, and have a couple of steel plates replacing a couple of vertebrae in the top of my spine. And as part of my recuperation, at the time, it coincided with some tragic news my family had. My father-in-law was diagnosed with prostate cancer. and it was quite an aggressive strain. So as part of my rehabilitation, because I could no longer play rugby, I could no longer do contact sport, I ended up doing charity events and trying to raise money for prostate cancer within that, because it's one of the prostate cancer is one of those things where more men die with it than die from it. It's the most curable form of cancer if it's caught early in early testing, but it's also the deadliest form of cancer if you don't catch it. So if it moves into mastitis, then that's it, it's done, and it moves into the lymph. So, but early detection of prostate cancer is almost 100% curable.
So there's several elements to that. So first of all, a message to us blokes of check your bits.
Check your bits. Yeah.
And so that's your charity. And you know, there's another element to that. So now I didn't know that you'd broken your neck and had metal plates. So presumably when you go through a metal detector, it'll ping. Didn't know that about your near relation, and actually that's one of the stories that's also come out in my walking with others, and learning just a little bit about their, I want to say backstory, but I don't mean that to be dismissive. It's but actually one of the key points here, and it applies to wider policing. You know, so many, I fear, look at the individual and think they know the individual just from their public utterances and
I love going into schools and talking to young people, and here in the northeast and in Teesside, we are a post-industrial town. We've got a great engineering heritage. We've built bridges, it's steel. Just this river we're talking about here, until a couple of years back, used to run orange.
Really?
Because there was iron ore in the hills, and it would pick it up further upstream, and it would come down and it would all be orange as it came through.
Really?
So we live in an area, and our educational attainment is lower than the average across the country and things like that. And I say to people, so people just assume you're a Tory, you're a posh guy, you've come from a privileged background. I'm not. I'm the product of a single working mum. She worked 2 jobs as I went through school. I left school at 16. Chose not to go to college, university, went straight into the world of work and worked my way up to where I am today. So when I speak to young people in our schools and say, oh, there's nothing for me and this, that and the other, and I'm not going to go to university, or my dad's done this, that or the other, I say, so what? So what? And that's the thing. And when you talk about backstories, that is something we in Cleveland, we need to understand that it's not all about, Tories aren't posh blokes that play polo on a weekend. It's no, I go to gigs with my son and things like that, and I like a beer, and I'll sing It's Coming Home and Sweet Caroline all day, every day.
The day after, so yesterday evening was the famous 2-1 semi-final victory. So we're filming this on the Wednesday, sorry, the Thursday of Thursday of that very same week.
And I'm sober, so
none of us have too much of the after effects of the previous evening. Steve, this has been absolutely a pleasure. Lisa as well, got you on camera again. This is, I've just got to swing the camera around again. You know, I've come from the North York Moors and Whitby, and so the publicised, well-known treasures of Whitby down there, and Robin Hood's Bay, and here we are in Saltburn and the mouth of the Tees up there, Hartlepool up there. So this coast lies ahead of me on my next few days walking. So I just want to thank you both for a wonderful introduction here to Cleveland, and I think that ice cream is now calling us, so we're heading in this direction. Thank you once again.